It is clear why they did this. The Broncos stay quiet at the deadline. They once again feel very secure and safe with who they have currently. They don't feel like they needed to trade away massive picks as the trade deadline, while being very exciting and the receiver market was open, the Broncos feel like they have what they need currently and going forward. I'm Sebastian, the Broncos Digest. Mark is joining me for this episode. How are you feeling post-trade deadline, Mark?
I have to say I'm a little surprised. I was expecting a last-minute blockbuster move. I was expecting all Broncos fans to be completely shocked by some crazy last second within the hour of the trade deadline ending insane move where we're giving up a bunch of draft capital in exchange for something like a receiver or a tight end. Because I know that the biggest talking point, the biggest conversation for the Broncos talking about, the trade deadline coming up was already with a pretty solid offense, can you add one or two more pieces to the wide receiver room, to the tight end room, and really solidify the depth that this offense has? So definitely a little bit shocked, but I think there is something to say about how good this team is right now, and there may be no reason to change anything up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, being at 7-2, like tied for the best record in the NFL, there's like kind of a reason that you could see that like they don't feel like they need to shake things up like you were saying, but there was a lot of smoke around that the Broncos at least inquiring, looking into the receiver market and the tight end market, and obviously while nothing transpired, nothing happened, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be interested in that going forward, maybe post this season, the 2025 season, in free agency, all that good stuff. It was just that the asking price at this point in the year was too high, and we'll get into like why that was the case. There were certain trades that happened earlier today that maybe boosted up a lot of these offers that they maybe had in place. So let's just jump right into it because it was a kind of a crazy day overall. My bad. Okay, so the deadline is gone, and sources confirm Broncos did not make any deadline deals. They were in on a few players at a few positions, but the prices were deemed too high. Jets general manager and former Broncos assistant general manager Darren Maugi didn't help with all those first-round picks he kept getting. He drove the market up, which was obviously, and I wanted to include this meme that I received nothing, you received nothing. That's George Payton's his mantra for today. Dolphins wanted a first round pick and more for Waddle, and teams weren't willing. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to talk about, because Jalen Waddle's name was getting thrown around a lot today and just throughout this week, that it felt like, oh, it's Waddle time for the Broncos. They're going to make a big splash for a wide receiver 1/2. And Ricky the dog was saying that the Broncos were in on it on Twitter. There were all these kind of like all this kind of smoke, and it was really, I think a lot of Broncos fans felt a little disappointed by the end that nothing transpired, where there was all this excitement and hype. Jordan Schultz was like, oh, I'm hearing the Broncos are really going for a big splash trade. And so anyway, I can understand Broncos fans feeling a little like, disappointed, underwhelmed at this point. But overall, I think like you and I agree, Mark, that this doesn't spell disaster for the Broncos by any means. It's just a matter of, okay, the price was too high, but they still feel that means that they still feel confident in the guys that they have, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking about Jalen Waddle, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the Dolphins right now. They are in shambles. They have no general manager. Their coach is on very thin ice, and their team is struggling. And their wide receiver one, Tyreek Hill, he's out with a season-ending injury right now.
Yeah.
So if they're even going to sniff the idea of giving up essentially their wide receiver one right now, it has to be for a lot of capital in return. They're obviously going to want first-round picks. They're going to want a lot of pieces in exchange for arguably their best player on their offensive depth chart right now. And so if there was any splash that was going to be made for Jalen Waddle, it was going to be a big one. I would have suspected giving away maybe a handful of depth chart wide receivers as well as a lot of picks. And I think, honestly, holding on to those picks is better right now because we're not in a space where we're lacking at the wide receiver position. We're seeing depth show for the first time in a few years for the Broncos with, Courtland Sutton getting a continuous amount of targets and touchdowns. but you're also seeing guys like Troy Franklin, Pat Bryant, Marvin Mims getting a lot more experience. You're even seeing Sean Payton utilize RJ Harvey, the rookie running back, in sort of like a slot wide receiver position where he's, moving out to the outside and catching routes out on the outer like hashes of the field. So I don't think it's at all the end of the world that this didn't really happen. I think it's best case scenario for us to hold on to the picks that we had and not make a like really massive blockbuster splash of a trade for a guy like Jalen Waddle.
No, I think you're totally right. The guys that we have, when the offense is rolling, are really helping, and they really get into a groove. Evan Ingram, while maybe not the best blocking tight end by any means, is still a really good pass, and quarterback-friendly tight end, which is really, really, it's something that we've been lacking for a little while now. And, with Adam Trautman, he'll be making some really good plays, splash plays. I think it's just a matter of, okay, what is the benefit of bringing in these new guys, these new talents, and will they really elevate the roster in a way that these guys that we already have, are they not capable of doing stuff like that? Because, listen, Jalen Waddle, while great, don't get me wrong, he doesn't necessarily, he's not really in those top 10 wide receiver talks. And the fact that they're demanding more than a first rounder is probably very scary for George Payton, because we know last time we were giving up multiple first rounders or over at least one first rounder was the Russell Wilson trade. That did not go very well for us. So it's just a matter of probably being aiding on the side of caution, and I have to respect it. So Cody Rourke said, as expected, the Broncos did not make a move at the NFL trade deadline, moving forward with who they have, which also sets them up to have flexibility going into free agency, where I expect them to add quality there. And that's kind of what we've been talking about, is that Bo Nix is in his second year right now. We're not like, oh, he's going into his year where he's going to need his fifth-year extension or anything like that. He still has time to play on his rookie deal before there's an extension talks being had. And I think that is going to help the Broncos be more flexible going into next offseason. This maybe isn't the trade deadline to go all out, to go all in. While this defense is amazing, don't get me wrong, They feel like we can still make a deep playoff run with the guys that we have, and I have to respect it, and I actually probably agree with it, because as many doubters as there will be throughout the NFL landscape, the Broncos keep winning. And I think that has been something that we were worried about at the beginning of the season. We lost 2 close games in a row, and we're like, okay, can we win the close games? Now it's undeniable. In the fourth quarter, teams fear us in the fourth quarter. So that's a huge thing going forward, and especially in the playoffs where games are going to be close. That's undeniable. And we now know how to win those games against good defenses, against bad defenses, and our defense is going to stand up no matter what. So I think that the fact that they feel secure about where they are actually gives me confidence that, listen, let's just see how far we can go with the squad that we have before we make any moves in the offseason.
Yeah, I agree. And you could also, with the whole free agency conversation, think of a situation like J.K. Dobbins. The Broncos made a huge free agency signing, and it's really working out in their favor offensively this season. Mm-hmm. Now that there has been a sense of silence for the trade deadline, we could almost expect to see something like that again in the offseason. We might add 1 or 2 other sleeper free agent deals, even if it's just for 1 or 2 years, that result in a lot of positivity on our depth chart. I mean, the positivity around J.K. Dobbins, not just the way he's playing, but the high chance that he's probably going to sign a little bit longer term of a deal with the Broncos. Something like that could happen later down the road because of the lack of excitement and the lack of movement that happened during the trade deadline for Denver.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the positive feeling that J.K. Dobbins has towards the Denver fan base and just the Denver organization as a whole is infectious, like we've talked about. That makes other guys want to extend here and stay here. And we didn't have to give any trade capital up for J.K. And he had a choice to come back to Los Angeles when he was trying to decide what team he wanted to be with. But he chose Denver because he believed in this team. And that means that next offseason, I think that will continue. People will be like, oh, wow, these guys really believe in Denver and then performed really, really well with that group. So why don't I try that and boost my chances of having a career resurgence with them? So I definitely think that's something that's going to be on the table. But yeah, Jalen Waddle, the price was too high. There's no deal that's going to be made. There is Zach Kelberman, who I've been using a lot here on the channel. He says he feels a bit disappointed that they didn't acquire another weapon for Bo Nix. If there ever was a time to go all in, this was it. But that's kind of what what we've been refuting a little bit is that Waddle, while he would move the needle, undoubtedly he would, like Courtland Sutton wouldn't have to be going up against every team's cornerback one. I do think that there's enough talent in these young guys that we're using, the chemistry that he's gaining with Pat Bryant, the chemistry that he clearly already has with Troy Franklin, especially in the red zone, and then Evan Ingram, if they can just start, really getting things going for a full game, I think that adding Waddle in would only add more to, the checklist for Bo Nix to figure out. I think that he has enough on his plate right now where that once he figures out how to work with every single offensive guy that we have, all these receivers and the running backs, then when the offseason rolls around and we get a big splash receiver or a big splash tight end, that's when things will feel a bit more like, okay, we're taking the next step. I mean, because who's to say with the guys that we have now that we're not going to make a deep playoff run? We're a 7-2, and the 2 losses we have were off of walk-off field goals. I think that those 2 games that we lost, we never trailed in those games. We only trailed in the last second of those games. So it's just a matter of, okay, let's just figure out how to hold a lead and stay that way throughout the entire game before, letting go, maybe bringing in the backups. So I don't know. I feel okay about this. I know a lot of Broncos fans are going to be feeling a little disappointed, but last thoughts maybe with the Colts, their big moves about how they did a crazy trade for Sauce Gardner. How does that compare to maybe what the Broncos did?
Yeah, I mean, before I get into the Colts, just a few other thoughts about some of the remarks you making a second ago.
Sure.
Broncos are 6 points and a ridiculous leveraging call away from being undefeated right now.
Seriously.
I mean, the season that they're having is very dominant across all aspects of their game. And what I like the most about how Denver's playing right now is if one week a certain aspect of the team isn't picking up the slack, the other aspect of that team picks up the slack where it needs to be done and gets the job done. Some weeks it's a little less defensive and it's more offense. Other weeks, the defense is having a masterclass performance as usual when the offense isn't necessarily picking up their pace. I don't think that this was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a huge trade to make a push for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I think we're a playoff caliber team, and I don't think people understand that even though we didn't make any moves, this team is equipped to make a deep run in the playoffs and beat some of the teams that we've already faced this season and get to a point in a position where they could find themselves in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I might get some lashback for saying this too, but I also don't think that the Broncos are in a position where they're like, win now, this is our only chance mentality. They're kind of on like a slow build-up trend to where like maybe we're another first or second round exit of the playoffs this year. Maybe we make it to the divisional championship and we exit there. That just means that we're trending even farther up and we have even more potential for the future.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of excitement around this team looking longer term. And I think that the reflection of that was represented in what happened at the trade deadline.
Oh, absolutely.
But then speaking of trying to make big moves and trying to be in this win now mentality, what the Colts did is exciting for this year. They acquire Sauce Gardner, but they gave up a ton of draft capital. So they're now in a position where they need to win the Super Bowl this year. They need to make the deepest run they can because once this season is over, whether they're hoisting the Lombardi Trophy or whether they're a first-round exit, they lost a significant amount of draft capital in that trade deal.
Yeah.
And the Broncos are not in that situation. The Broncos and the Colts could get matched up in the first round of the playoffs. The Broncos could beat the Colts, and essentially the Colts would be like in this terrible position where they made all these moves and nothing came of it. But the Broncos, if they lose in the first or the second round, it didn't cost them anything, if that makes sense. So I think that's a pretty exciting reality.
I agree. 2 first-rounders, to me, was egregious for, Sauce Gardner, who, you could argue he's in the top 10 of corners, but it's like, I wouldn't be happy with that kind of a trade personally. So
I'd be happy if I was a Jets fan. I mean, let the rebuild begin, I guess.
Absolutely. And then,
I mean, two first rounders, and you're in shambles right now, so you're going to have low picks next draft.
Right. Might as well.
Might see the Jets trend up pretty soon here.
Yeah. We'll see what comes of that. But I think there's a lot of anxiety with Broncos fans, just maybe because the Chiefs game is coming up. The Chiefs are on their bye, and then they'll face us. And how that game goes will maybe be very indicative of who's going to win the division, for one, and then two, how we'll fare in the playoffs. Can we beat the big teams, the big boys? Are we going to be considered amongst that group? So, Broncos got to take care of business on Thursday. The Raiders, they trade away Jacoby Myers, so Riley Moss and, Jahdae Barron won't hopefully have too much on their hands besides just guarding, Brock Bowers, best tight end in the league. So, as long as they can figure that part out, which I believe this defense can, I think the Broncos will take care of business and then move on to really the true threat, which is the Chiefs, and who are, they don't want to see the Broncos ruin their chances of winning 10 straight division titles in a row, and the Broncos obviously want to be the people to spoil that. So in the meantime, we'll get ready for the Raiders game. We'll have a preview for all of that stuff, but any final thoughts before we sign off?
Just excited for the next few weeks. Looking
Yep.
forward to what the Broncos are going to be able to accomplish against two divisional opponents and arguably the biggest game of the season at this point against the Chiefs
Yes.
in a few weeks here.
Absolutely. Well, until then, until the Raiders game, we'll probably do a live stream for all that stuff. But until then, we'll see you guys in the next video.